Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily. The prosecutor of the so-called Doomsday cult couple is asking for the help of a veteran homicide and death penalty prosecutor. Is this a sign murder charges could finally be coming for Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell? NFL player Deshaun Watson now facing nearly a dozen sexual misconduct lawsuits. The attorney for the women calling for a full investigation.
This case isn't about money.
The Supreme Court agrees to hear arguments in the Boston Marathon bomber. Should a convicted bomber face the death penalty? And jury selection in the Derek Chauvin trial, we investigate the so-called autonomous zone around George Floyd Square.
Injustice closed the streets and only justice can open the streets back up.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmire along with Terri Austin. Jury selection in the trial of Derek Chauvin is nearly complete. Law and Crime's Kim Johnson is in Minneapolis and is here to tell us about the latest juror chosen as one of the ex-cops charged with murdering George Floyd goes to trial.
That's right, Brian. Week 3 of jury selection in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin is underway. The judge wants 14 jurors, including 2 alternates and an additional alternate for just this week in case one of those jurors drops out or is dismissed. The judge seated a 14th juror. She is a white woman in her 20s, newly married, and works as a social worker. She says that she has empathy for people who face drug addiction, and while she has never had a bad interaction with police she does believe that people of color aren't treated equally. Here is her being questioned on that.
It's mostly my training, things I've been taught in college and school of minorities not having the same opportunities as in many areas, employment, education, things like that. It's mostly my training.
Okay. Do you have any personal experience, or have you had clients or friends who've sort of discussed their experiences especially in terms of the criminal justice system?
Not that I can think of.
Both sides used peremptory strikes. The defense used up 2, one against a white woman who said that she attended a couple of protests and held a sign with a fist. The state struck a white male, an avid fisherman, who said that he had a somewhat unfavorable view of Black Lives Matter. Now, Judge Cahill has given both the defense and the state additional strikes to use because of the publicity maybe tainting the jury pool. So far, the state has used 8 of 10 strikes. The defense has used 15 of 18 strikes, meaning the state has just 2 left to use. The defense has 3, with 1 juror still needing to be seated. Brian.
Thanks, Kim. And here's our latest breakdown of the seated members of the Derek Chauvin jury. Juror number 1 is a white male in his 20s. Juror 2 is a multiracial woman in her 20s. Juror 3 is a white man in his 30s. 4 is a black man in his 30s. 5 is a white woman in her 50s. 6 is a black man in his 30s. 7 is a white woman in her 50s. 8 is a black man in his 40s. 9 is a multiracial woman in her 40s. 10 is a white woman in her 50s. 11 is a black woman in her 60s. 12 is a white woman in her 40s. 13 is a white woman in her 50s. And 14 is a white woman in her 20s. Also noteworthy in court Monday was the state's jury consultant, Dr. Christina Marinikis. She's reportedly working for the state pro bono. She's currently the director of jury research at Litigation Insights, a national trial consulting firm. She has degrees in law and psychology. One of the jurors dismissed Monday for cause said they could not be fair and impartial after hearing about the city's $27 million settlement with George Floyd's family. Take a listen to what the judge said after the juror left the courtroom.
I guess the news sort of slanted me in a way to think that maybe there's, opinions already made up about it, and I guess it sort of swayed my opinion to hear that they got that big of that much money, I guess, yeah.
Does that maybe move you off the presumption of innocence towards, well, maybe there is something there?
I mean, yes, to be honest with you.
That was juror 119 for cause. I guess we can't disagree with the premise anymore.
Joining us today is criminal defense attorney Julie Rendelman and Terri Austin. Julie, you've been watching jury selection. Based on the jurors' responses and the questions asked, how do you feel about this jury hearing this case?
So, the one thing that stood out is every single time a juror was asked a question about Derek Chauvin, every single one of them had a negative response in regards to him, but all agreed they could be fair. And I think that's the most that the defense can expect. No one's going to walk in and think they have a positive view of Derek Chauvin. I think the idea that they're open-minded, that they're open to the idea of listening to the testimony and keeping an open mind until the very end is all that they need. And hopefully that's what they're going to do, because that's what both sides should want.
Now, Terri, the judge had a certain amount of numbers they wanted to go for, then they went back down to 14. Now they're increasing that number. Is that the right move to increase the number back to where it was originally was or close to? And what do you think of the jurors selected?
You know, Brian, I think that with a trial of this magnitude, Judge Cahill should go even higher. I would choose at least 6 additional, and I'd go up to 18, because you never know when someone might need to be excused for cause. And he knows that opening statements aren't going to occur until March 29th, so he has plenty of time. I think the composition is pretty good. You went through the rundown there. Right now we have 9 women and 5 men, and I think that's a good mixture. And, you know, we have some diversity too. 6 of them are racially diverse. So I think so far the judge is doing a good job and the attorneys are doing a good job with the selection so far.
Yeah, 18 I think would be a much better number. You got to remember, maybe a juror hears something in the media. Maybe, I don't know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and someone gets in close contact with someone and we don't have enough jurors. I think 18 would be a good number, but of course we'll keep eyes on which jurors still remain as this case continues. Thank you both. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the prosecutors in the Doomsday cult duo case are trying to add a Missouri homicide prosecutor to the case. A sign of charges to come, we discuss. But first, what has become of 38th in Chicago, the corner where George Floyd died, and how a city can move forward next. Welcome back. Since the death of George Floyd last Memorial Day, some residents have established an autonomous zone at the intersection as they demand change from the police department. Angenette and Levy is here to tell us how the zone has become a major public safety concern.
Brian, Minneapolis Police Chief Medaria Arredondo says enough is enough. He says that shootings have increased in the area and now federal agents are being brought in to help reopen that intersection of 38th and Chicago.
The best public safety remedy right now is to open up and get that intersection flowing again.
For the last 9 months, the area of 38th and Chicago has been closed as it evolved into a memorial, now known as George Floyd Square. There's artwork and flowers, but behind the barricades, the mayor of Minneapolis says another problem has emerged in a space that should be a symbol of racial justice and healing.
This is also a location that has been subject to an increasing level of violence. There have been individuals and groups located at this intersection that are not celebrating the life of George Floyd.
In fact, earlier this month, a man was killed in the area now dubbed the Autonomous Zone. Police say the shooting was part of an internal gang dispute. City leaders say business owners and residents have complained about the intersection being closed. One person not complaining, resident Andy Brown.
Give us justice and we'll all go home.
Brown has lived in the neighborhood surrounding 38th and Chicago for 2 years. He doesn't fear the autonomous zone and says the city has not made good on a list of demands made by a group of neighbors called Meet on the Street.
We've told you exactly what we need. We've told you that we need a jobs program. We've told you that we need relief in a rent-to-own program. We've told you that we want to see policing change.
Now the Minneapolis police chief says the FBI is helping monitor the autonomous zone.
The FBI has been involved in the George Floyd incident since the very onset.
Former FBI agent Stuart Kaplan says along with a civil rights investigation, the FBI will work with the community in Minneapolis, as the Bureau did in Ferguson, Missouri, after the death of Michael Brown.
The FBI is going to try to broker a stand down, if you will, to renew the trust in the community that there's an understanding that we need to have law enforcement come in and monitor and police and enforce the rule of law.
Now, the ATF is also involved in the investigation of the autonomous zone and the violence that has occurred there. Chief Arredondo says the timeline of the trial is not going to dictate when 38th and Chicago reopens. So it's really a question of when it will reopen, not if. He says it's reopening, and right now he's not giving an exact date. Brian?
Angenette, there's been a large police presence, including members of the Minnesota National Guard, at the courthouse where the trial is being held. Are there any updates on arrests?
Yeah, actually, we have some really good news to tell you about, Brian. There haven't really been any arrests. There haven't been any of these protesters. The chief held a press conference along with other state law enforcement officials, and they said that everyone has been really peaceful out there at the courthouse. They've been really pleased, and they want everyone to be able to come out and express themselves and protest as the First Amendment allows. And they have Operation Safety Net, and that's really that joint state and local effort to keep everyone safe throughout the trial.
Thanks, Angenette. Be sure to tune in to the Law and Crime Network for gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Derek Chauvin trial in the murder of George Floyd. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a court overturns the Boston Marathon bomber's death sentence. We break down what's next for the man accused of killing 3 and injuring hundreds. Plus, who is the homicide prosecutor with 25 years of experience that may be on the case against Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, and why is she needed? We're back. The prosecutor of the Doomsday cult duo is requesting approval for help from a top homicide prosecutor across the country. Law and Crime's Terri is here to tell us about the latest request in the Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell case.
Well, no one is charged with murder in the case, but this latest request suggests charges just might finally be coming. Lori Vallow and her husband Chad Daybell are charged with concealing and destroying evidence while Vallow's children were reported missing. Authorities discovered the bodies of JJ and Tylee Ryan buried in shallow graves on Daybell's property. Prosecuting attorney Rob Wood is now asking the district judge to allow Missouri attorney Rachel Smith to be added to his team. Smith is a 25-year veteran homicide and death penalty prosecutor and worked at the Missouri Attorney General's office. Wood wrote to the Madison County, Idaho Board of Commissioners in a letter obtained by East Idaho News. Wood says the temporary addition of an experienced prosecutor to work on the Daybell case will enable us to meet the increased manpower demands during the duration of this high-profile matter and ensure justice for the victims and people of Madison County.
Back to discuss the prosecution's request is criminal defense attorney Julie Rendelman. Terri, in my experience, homicide prosecutors prosecute homicide cases. And we're not just getting a homicide prosecutor, we're going almost clear across the country to find one. Is this a sign of charges to come?
Well, Brian, we can only hope it is a sign of things to come. The fact that they requested a seasoned homicide prosecutor, it is foreshadowing, in my opinion, charges that might come. You know, the children were reported missing back in September 2019, and their remains were found in June of 2020. So the family's been waiting a very long time for murder charges to be brought. And, you know, authorities now, in my opinion, they should have all of the electronic, all of the physical evidence that they need to connect these murders to Lori and Chad Daybell.
Terri, I think the smart thing to do here is ask maybe another seasoned homicide prosecutor. So Julie, all right, former Kings County Homicide Bureau Deputy Bureau Chief, what do you think, Julie?
So I wish I was as confident as Terri, and I'm not. You know, one of the things they've said is that the county needs to make sure that they're covering not just the Lori Daybell case, you know, but the other cases. And it seems that the focus on this case is potentially taken away from cases that also need attention. And so there might be just, you know, the use of this prosecutor to come in. A, she has a ton of experience. B, she may be able to view things differently than others. And C, she also may be able to take some of the load off of the prosecutors that are handling the case right now. Do I think it's leading closer to a potential homicide prosecution? Sure, but that in no means, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't mean it's coming anytime soon, but I guess we'll see.
All right, wait and see is what Julie Rendelman and Terri Austin are telling us, so we'll do just that. Thank you both. When we come back, Sexual assault allegations against NFL quarterback Deshaun Watson are growing. What over a dozen women are accusing him of, and the potential criminal investigation next. Welcome back. The U.S. Supreme Court is agreeing to hear the government's argument for reinstating the death penalty for the Boston Marathon bomber. A federal court of appeals vacated the death sentence for Zohar Sarniev. The circuit court decided that pretrial publicity was not properly dealt with during jury selection, which was less than 20 miles from where the bombs went off. The appeals court said the local jury was neither impartial nor indifferent and ruled Sarniev would spend the rest of his life behind bars. 3 died and 260 were hurt in the 2013 bombing. The Supreme Court justices are expected to hear the case in the fall. Impartial jury, it's the right of all accused of a crime right there in the Sixth Amendment, but only the death penalty is vacated. Terri, what do you make of the court's ruling?
You know what, Brian, it's interesting. I think this is why some people say that jury selection is one of the most important parts of a trial. You know, whether you believe in the death penalty or not, it is an appropriate case for the death penalty because of the heinous nature of this particular crime. The court literally vacated this death sentence just because it determined the trial court erred because it failed to ask potential jurors any details. So it just underscores the importance of making sure when you're preparing for trial that you do a voir dire that gets into detail and it makes sure that you ask all the questions that you need so this doesn't happen after the fact, particularly when it's a huge case like this.
Now, Julie, you know as much as anyone else, whenever a Supreme Court agrees to hear a case, there's speculation. Do you think they could reverse or maybe clarify the ruling for future cases?
You know, it's a good question. Look, Terry's exactly right. There's nothing more important than the voir dire process, and there's nothing more important than the voir dire process when it comes to a death penalty case. I mean, we're talking about Scott Peterson again because of mistakes made in regards to that specific aspect of the case. And when jurors are asked to make a decision in regards to the death penalty, you got to know that they're going to be fair and impartial, and they're not going to already have opinions about the defendant's guilt before going in, because that is not going to yield you a fair and impartial jury. And a lot of people say, well, he deserves the death penalty, who cares? Well, it's incredibly important for a justice system to work that every single person gets a fair and impartial jury and gets the right, obviously the charges from the judge that make them able to be fair and impartial in these type of cases.
Yeah, it's about the system working correctly regardless of what a person is accused of, because if the system doesn't work properly, then what are we as a group or as a society, I guess, regardless of who we're prosecuting. Turning now to Texas, where a dozen women have come forward with sexual misconduct claims against an NFL player. Deshaun Watson is facing 12 lawsuits by women alleging sexual assault and inappropriate conduct. Watson is the quarterback for the Houston Texans. Among the allegations, one woman says that earlier this month, Watson touched her with his genitals and exposed himself while she was working as a massage therapist. In another incident, a woman claims Watson forced her to perform oral sex during a massage session last year. Attorney Tony Busby has filed the lawsuits on behalf of the accuser and says that as many as 22 women have contacted him with similar reports.
These women who are stepping forward knew that they would face scorn and ridicule. They all agreed to plead for the minimal jurisdictional limits of the court, and they bring these cases for one reason only: stopping further misconduct from this defendant.
Busby posted on Instagram saying his team would be submitting affidavits and evidence from several women and called for a grand jury investigation.
We're going to get all the lawsuits on file first, put together a package, submit it to the police department.
Watson has hired attorney Rustin Hardin to represent him in the civil lawsuits. Hardin is known for representing athletes such as pitcher Roger Clemens, acquitted of lying to Congress, and Minnesota Vikings running back Adrian Peterson, accused of child abuse. Watson posted on Twitter Friday denying the allegations and claiming they were motivated by money. Julie, these are civil cases, but if a grand jury is presented with these facts, could it turn criminal?
It could. I have to say, I've never heard of a defense attorney thinking that he is going to decide, whether or not a case is brought to the grand jury. I understand he has, witnesses and complainants. that potentially are going to come forward. If, in fact, what they say amounts to a criminal case, and if they're vetted by, obviously, the district attorney's office, and they believe that they're credible, then yes, we could be moving from a civil arena to a criminal arena, although usually DAs like it to start with criminal first. They don't always love for it to start as a civil case, just based on concerns about witnesses in terms of their, whether there's a money issue in regards to the investigation.
Absolutely. I'd like to kind of spearhead that investigation, that prosecution. Terri, a dozen women with a supposed 10 more wanting to come forward. Could this be a Weinstein-like situation in the world of professional sports?
It sure sounds like it, Brian. The fact that there are so many women, it sounds like Weinstein, Epstein, Cosby even a little bit. When there are so many people who are claiming that this type of lewd behavior, and even it might rise to sexual assault, as Julie was saying, that means that where there's smoke, there might just be some fire. Watson signed a 4-year contract back in September for nearly $111 million. That is a lot of money. So theoretically, he could defend himself against both civil and criminal charges. But we'll see whether or not there's enough to bring these charges both in civil court and in criminal court, and whether or not there's enough evidence to actually convict him on either one of those cases.
Yeah, and a lot of these allegations seem to be, when you think of the Harvey Weinstein or the Jeffrey Epstein comparison, it's a kind of a similar MO for all of these women who are coming forward. They're masseuses, they're massage therapists, and they're talking about a similar MO that could have some really detrimental effects if this does come into court, based on being able to tie it all together. Julie, Terri, thank you, and thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.